Today, excuse me, I'm going to bloviate about a few more brass playing myths. No, I don't mean the little thing with the flappy wings. That's a moth. If you think that's a myth, you've been watching too many old Peter Sellers and Inspector Clouseau movies. Anyway, the first myth I'm going to address is R matters to do with water keys on brass instruments. Uh, a lot of people, hello, Wilma, a lot of people still refer to them as spit valves. And I got tired a long time ago of trying to argue with guys who were convinced, despite all the evidence, that they have nothing to do with spit. I even challenged a few of them to take their mouthpiece and blow away and hold a cup. And I said, if you can produce one drop of spit, I'll lick it up. And of course, they couldn't. What does come out is atomized halitosis and moist air. But what happens is that air going into your lungs gets heated and moistened up, goes into the instrument, which is cooler. When the moist air hits the metal, the moisture condenses, and that's why in a trumpet you get a little bit of condensation, and that's why with a tuba you need a bucket. You got gallons and gallons and gallons of precipitation coming out of the horn. So that's one myth I would like to address here, one additional myth. Now, another myth I would like to address is the chin waggle in terms of flexibilities. I know a lot of educators will say, all you got to do is waggle the chin and the note will go up and down. Baloney. It's a matter of coordination. Yes, the chin can go up and down, but you can stop it altogether and just work from here. It's a question of tongue position and tension and chin all at once. It's a matter of coordination. You can play and waggle your chin without flexibilities. It just looks silly and sounds funny. Now, the final myth I'd like to address is this thing. Lots of educators, and as I've said before, brass educators like to sound like they know what they're talking about. And one of the most popular truisms is playing from the corners. Back in the 60s, when I was a student, guys used to take paper straws and tear them up and put pieces in here and try to pull them and develop those corners. Well, at the University of Edinburgh, some bright boy thought to look at the embouchure while you're playing under infrared. And by gosh, what ends up working is a little tiny bit in here. That's why you feel the burn here. You don't feel it on the corners. And all this big muscle down here, but the corners don't even light up. So the part of your face that's doing the work doesn't involve the corners at all. In fact, the corners shouldn't be tight because that's where your air comes in. They should be ready to, Louis Armstrong, Satchmo, he used to play, no kidding. If you'd ever seen him play, if you got the light just in the right spot, you'd see a hail of spit coming out of because he played with loose corners like this. And he didn't need corners. But the corners, as demonstrated by infrared photography, don't do anything. Nothing, absolutely nothing. There's no such thing as playing from the corners. Now, the reason we have this disconnect is because educators assume they know what they're talking about, and they're relying on centuries of method embouchure junk pseudoscience from the, the 19th century. And it's more a case of belief than it is scientific facts and evidence. As I've said before, if you really want to know how the embouchure works, how brass playing works, there are some very good textbooks on the physics of brass winds, the science of brass winds. They're a couple of $100. They're a big hit to the wallet, but buy at least one of them and avail yourselves of real information and try to steer clear of any method embouchure because they're all baloney. As I've said before, a great player can make a bad method embouchure work. And that's certainly the case. And the example I cited before was Dennis Brain. My gosh, look at the horrible embouchure he was taught. And that was back in the days when I was taught the smiling embouchure. There were some guys who were incredible players with the smiling embouchure. But the point is that they were incredible players despite the horrible embouchure they were taught. And this is also true of Farkas. He was a great player. He would have been great no matter what kind of embouchure he was taught. He could have gone, and but a great player, you won't hold him back and you won't hold him down, not even with a bad method. Something else I'd like to draw your attention to, if you go, like you're ready to play, you'll see that I've got a little hole there. Now, a lot of teachers try to discourage players from moving the most. They want it centered and it should be up and this way, like crosshairs and a sniper's rifle. Baloney. If that spot works with maximum efficiency, use it. Ignore advice to the contrary. The proof of this is to be found in an instrument. If you've been to university, you may have had the chance to play a cornetto, an instrument made of two halves of wood covered with parchment or leather. It's about yay long and it's bent like this. Camilla Langdell on YouTube. Look for her name here in association with the cornetto. She will explain this in some depth. With the cornetto, they use a very offset embouchure, and the first thing a cornetto teacher would do is look for that spot on me and say, "Yeah, there's." Now, back when I was in university, nobody, including the instructors, knew anything about the cornetto. We just had to, we took class strings, class brass, class percussion, class this, class that, class act. Anyway, we took the cornetto. I never did get a reasonable sound out of a cornetto. But if my instructors had been somebody like Ms. Langdell, she would have known. She would have spotted this spot right away and says, take the fipple, little tiny, tiny mouthpiece, and put it over there, and now you're going to get some sound. And this is also true, especially on the horn and the trumpet and the cornet. Anything with a mouthpiece diameter, once you start getting around 15, 16, 17 millimeters, you got to start thinking in terms of that efficient spot. Now, I don't know if it shows up here, but I've got a big scar here on my lip and scar tissue inside my lip from being taught the smiling embouchure and from with the horn against the lips and making a rictus, as the old Arbenz book used to say. And this was, I was saved by players like Maynard Ferguson, and in the classical world, what was his name? super high player. He was the guy who's credited for reviving Clarino trumpet playing. But these guys all went for what they called the non-pressure system or the no-pressure system. And, they used to do all kinds of gimmicks like hang a trumpet from its middle valve and you just walk up to it and play. But it worked. It worked good compared to all the garbage they were taught before. This appeared I don't recall it ever having heard of it in the 1950s, but I suspect it was getting started at that time. But it sure took off in the 1960s. Guys like Maynard Ferguson were using the non-pressure system, and look how high he could play, and with incredible big fat sounds. Another guy like that was Harry James. He used to play at a dance club on Scott Road. Forgive me for not being able to remember its location or the name of it, but he and his son, who played trombone, used to play at this dance club. Well, I was talking to some of the guys there one night, and they were telling me that, Harry, you wouldn't believe this guy. He could put his horn down for months at a time and just pick it up and blow all night long. And as a matter of fact, in terms of technique, some of the top players like Miles Davis and Dizzy Gillespie and a few others, I think Clifford Brown possibly. My dad was scandalized when he heard this. My dad was a huge Dizzy Gillespie fan, John Burks Gillespie. But yes, they asked these guys, who's got the best technique? And they all said without hesitation, Harry James. And I got a look at Harry James's mouthpiece one day. My trumpet teacher at the time, Bobby Hilton, had, I think, either the same or close to it. Bobby's was copper, and it looked like you'd taken the round end of a ball peen hammer and gone bunk, and put a dent in the metal, and then put a hole in the middle. You couldn't catch people's cooties in those days. There was no AIDS or herpes or anything to go around. You could just swap mouthpiece. So I got to try it. I couldn't get a sound out of that thing. It was like a dent in a piece of metal. And but I realized in this more enlightened age, the reason I couldn't get a sound out of it because my technique at the time was horrible. I was using lots of pressure, and if you use pressure, you bottom out. Harry James probably didn't even know it. It's just I very much doubt he was taught to play. He was sort of a self-made player, but when he put the mouthpiece to his lips, he would just touch it. And so Bobby Hilton did too. And those guys could blow. They got that big Harry James sound. That's what Bobby Hilton was going for, the big Harry James sound. But if you look at what was producing that sound, very small diameter cup, if you could call it that, and just barely touching. And there's a lot to be learned simply from that. Why did it work? Why was it so far superior? Why could these guys put their horns down for months and just pick them up and blow effortlessly? Now, when you get into the classical world, you have to use a bigger mouthpiece to get, you're going for maximum resonance, as close to a big fat sinus wave as you can get. And that's why a lot of classical trumpet players use a 1 1/4 C with a tight back bore. And it's a combination of lots of meat on the sound, lots of as much lip as possible producing the sound, and but at the same time, as little effort as possible. And that's one thing that's still taught very poorly. Like I see a lot of students even today, you know, and playing very, very sharp on the mouthpiece. I mentioned before that if I had it to do all over again, I would come up with something I would call the vocal embouchure. because of the approach that vocal teachers have to teaching voice, which would improve uh, brass instruction immeasurably. Um, for example, uh, a vocal teacher is going to teach you something that you should be taught and should be learning on all brass instruments: pear-shaped tones, big, fat, pear-shaped tones. Now, with voice, as in brass instruments, what you're doing is creating maximum efficiency by playing as low as possible on the note without bending the note down. That is how you get that perfect classical sound. You shouldn't even use that vocabulary, perfect classical sound. What you're aiming for is maximum efficiency. And it's the same with the human voice. If you're too high up on the note, you're going to get the same effect. Like I've seen trumpet players playing in community bands with their slides pulled way out like this. And it's like, how you? Well, what they're doing is they're playing way up in the top of the mouthpiece and they're lipping it way up. And it's like, you look at my horn and look at your, well, different horns. No, let me take your horn in my mouthpiece and I'll pull it in so it's, there's about that much sticking out, and then boom, it's in tune. Well, the reason is I'm playing as low as I can on the note. Here's how you do it. Drop your tongue, shape your mouth like this, da 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 da. Oh, and all of a sudden these guys are going 0 to hero. Um, I'll do another video on even more brass myths, but I think that's all for today. I'm being assaulted by left and right by cats wanting attention.